2 weeks. That's how long it took for my wife to destroy our marriage. 14 days after I slipped a ring on her finger, I walked into our apartment, early arms full of takeout from the place she loved, and found her in bed with her ex. She didn't even flinch. Just pulled the covers over herself like I was the intruder. And the worst part? She smiled. Said this was inevitable, Ethan. That moment shattered me, not because she cheated, but because she meant it. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. We had returned from our honeymoon just 8 days earlier. Santorini. Blue rooftops and sunsets that looked like fire pouring into the sea. She'd worn this white sundress with gold trim and spun around under every blooming tree. I was still editing pictures from that trip, still smiling at her laughter when it all came undone. The night before I left for San Francisco, she kissed me like nothing was wrong. She said, "Bring back something ridiculous for the bookshelf." I brought back a ceramic bust of a frog in a top hat. It's probably still in the paper bag I dropped that day. It was a Thursday afternoon. I'd wrapped my meetings early, caught an earlier flight, thinking maybe I'd surprise her. She'd been tired lately, distracted. I figured work was wearing her down, and thought a little celebration might lift her spirits, just the two of us. I remember the moment I turned the key in the door. The faint sound of music. Not ours, something too moody, too curated. Then a laugh. Not hers, deeper, sharper. Then silence. I stepped into the apartment. The living room looked exactly the same. Her heels in the corner, one of my sketches on the coffee table, half a glass of wine by the window. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I walked in without knocking, because why would I ever need to? Julian was lying on his side, shirtless, smug. Sabrina was beside him, her wedding ring still on. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She didn't stammer or cry. She just looked at me like someone who'd already walked out emotionally weeks ago. "Ethan," she said, calm as ever. "This wasn't planned, but it's right. We were pretending before. Pretending. 2 years of dating, 10 months of planning, a honeymoon built on laughter and soft plans for children. And she called it pretending." Julian smirked and got up to grab his blazer like this was some casual brunch. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I set the food down on the dresser and walked out. Closed the door behind me, like I was leaving a meeting that ran too long. I think they expected me to explode. I think she wanted that some messy breakup she could blame on emotion. Instead, I gave her nothing. No reaction. Just space. That night I booked a hotel. The next morning I called a moving service. By the weekend everything I owned was in a storage unit and I was gone. Sabrina didn't text, didn't call. Not for 2 whole weeks. And when she finally did, it wasn't to apologize. It was to ask why I wasn't fighting for her. Fighting for what? For someone who had already decided I wasn't enough, I didn't respond. I didn't block her either. I just let her words sit there, unread, unanswered. I wasn't going to argue with a ghost. Because here's the thing. No one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't always come with chaos. Sometimes it comes dressed in calm certainty. Sometimes it looks you in the eye and dares you to break. But I didn't break. Not that day. Not ever again. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not even Tate, who'd been my best friend since architecture school. Not my mother, who still thought Sabrina was the kind of woman prayers were made for. I kept the truth locked up because part of me still couldn't believe it had happened. The silence wasn't noble, it was survival. Speaking it aloud would have made it real, and I wasn't ready to carry that weight. Not yet. I moved into a furnished unit in Midtown, a place so sterile and temporary it felt like a waiting room for a life I hadn't figured out how to live yet. The walls were blank. The fridge hummed like a hollow chest. My wedding ring sat in the drawer beside a keycard, and a receipt from the steakhouse I never got to take her to. That first weekend alone, I watched the sunrise through the floor-to-ceiling glass and didn't feel a thing. I worked. That's all I could control. I spent 14-hour days redesigning a green tech center in San Jose, sketching glass lines and wind channels until my eyes blurred. I didn't go online, didn't check Sabrina's socials, didn't ask questions, but that didn't stop the questions from coming. Lysandra, her childhood friend and unapologetic hype machine, texted, "Hey, haven't seen you at any of the group stuff. Everything cool with you and Sab? I left it unread." Sabrina didn't text again after the first time. I think she expected me to chase, to beg for clarity, to break. But when the silence kept stretching, she must have gotten uneasy. 3 days later, she finally called. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then let it ring out. She called again the next day, then once more that weekend. Never left a voicemail, just more silence trying to fill the one I had left behind. That Sunday, she sent a photo of the ceramic frog bust I'd brought back from San Francisco. It sat on the entryway table of our old place, surrounded by lilacs, her favorite flower now arranged like an apology. This made me think of you. I miss our stupid little inside jokes. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I missed her, but because of the sheer audacity it took to cheat on someone and still want to reminisce like nothing had happened. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't go back. Not ever. Not even if she fell to her knees and cried blood. I wasn't interested in being mourned by someone who didn't value me until I became quiet. My silence became a wall, and every time she reached out, whether by text, by call, or by memory, I let the bricks stack higher. Not out of spite, but because I was building something stronger than anger. Distance. She didn't love me. She loved the version of me who made her feel adored. But the moment that attention wasn't enough, she went searching for validation in an old flame, someone who knew her before growth, before consequences. Julianne was comfort food for her ego. The silence was working. It left her unsure. And uncertainty was the only justice I could serve without lowering myself. On the 15th day, Tate finally cornered me after a team presentation. "All right, man, what's going on? You're living like a monk and working like the city's about to fall into the ocean." I almost lied. But then I said it out loud for the first time. Sabrina cheated. With Julian. Tate didn't say anything at first, just leaned back, let out a long breath. Then he said, "Damn. So that's why you disappeared." I nodded. "Don't let this make you small, Ethan," he added quietly. "You don't deserve to shrink to fit someone else's betrayal." That stuck with me, because silence wasn't just space anymore. It was strategy. And Sabrina had no idea who she'd actually walked away from. A funny thing happens when you stop responding to someone who hurt you. They start rewriting history. Sabrina's silence had fractured, and now it was leaking in strange, slippery ways. A week after my conversation with Tate, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of Sabrina's latest post on her curated lifestyle-filtered Instagram, a throwback from our honeymoon captioned, "Not every story ends the way we expect, but love always leaves a mark." Healing had growth. The comments were nauseating. "Sending hugs, babe. You deserve real happiness. Some people just aren't ready for a queen like you." I didn't respond, but I bookmarked it. Not out of obsession, just clarity. That was who she wanted to be, now the woman scorned, not the one who scorched the ground herself. Meanwhile, I was quietly writing a new version of myself. I accepted a short-term consultancy with a sustainable design firm in Singapore. Ariel. Lin. Their regional director had been trying to recruit me for a year. I'd always said no, too much change, too far away, too uncertain. But uncertainty didn't scare me anymore. Ariel was sharp, direct, emotionally fluent. She never asked about my personal life, just sent me concept decks at 2 a.m. with notes like, "You'll like the roofline on this clean Defiant." Her work ethic matched mine, and for the first time in weeks I felt the buzz of creation return. Tate noticed the shift. "You're glowing," he said one night after drinks. "Still bruised as hell, but there's light under there." I shrugged. I'm learning to appreciate the quiet. "What about Sabrina?" he asked. Still nothing. I hesitated. She tried to soft reach, posted some things, sent me a Spotify playlist with our wedding song buried in the middle. Tate rolled his eyes. "Textbook manipulation. She doesn't miss you, she misses control." I knew he was right, but some nights the memories still trickled in. Her bare feet on the kitchen tile, the way she used to trace circles on my chest when she couldn't sleep. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the version of myself who believed in her. And then came Julian. He posted a photo from their new condo downtown. Sleek, overpriced, soulless. The caption only forward. "No regrets." Sabrina was in the background, glass of wine in hand, not smiling, just present. Like furniture, it didn't sting. It clarified. She hadn't upgraded. She'd settled for familiarity disguised as passion. I sent nothing back. I simply changed. New number, new locks on old storage, new furniture. I donated every single item she'd picked out for our apartment, down to the gold-trimmed dinner plates she swore made food taste better. By the time spring pushed its way through Manhattan, I'd built a rhythm again. Long runs, focused design, silent mornings, nights filled with sketching jazz and the slow rebuilding of self-respect. I wasn't angry anymore. I was becoming unrecognizable. To her. To the version of me that used to orbit her emotions, and that more than any revenge was the real beginning. Sabrina didn't realize how quickly a fairy tale could turn into a cautionary tale. At first, Julian was everything she wanted him to be: polished, attentive, powerful. Their relationship moved fast because it was familiar. They slipped into old jokes, old habits, and old patterns without question. He poured wine like it was a love language, made expensive plans, took her to restaurants where no one knew Ethan's name. For a while it worked, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Julian didn't listen, he instructed. He interrupted her stories, corrected her opinions. Everything was filtered through his lens of how things should be. His compliments came with qualifiers. "You'd look better in something tighter," or "Your hair's nice when you don't try so hard." She laughed them off at first, but the laughter didn't last. Their condo, which had once seemed sleek and sexy, now felt cold. The high-end furniture Julian picked clashed with her softer taste, and even the air felt curated. He didn't ask what kind of art she liked. He ordered 2 abstract prints, mounted them above the fireplace, and said, "Done." Every morning, Julian checked the mirror longer than he checked in with her. His cologne hit the air before his words did. And on the mornings she didn't wear makeup, he looked at her like she was a mess in progress. By week 4, the shine had dulled. Meanwhile, Ethan's silence had become louder than any fight could have been. He hadn't responded, hadn't made a scene, hadn't begged. And that absence began to haunt her. There was a confidence in his distance that unsettled her. She checked his LinkedIn and saw he'd updated his job title. A global role. consulting in Singapore. There was a new photo of him presenting at a design symposium, crisp suit, steady eyes, not a trace of heartbreak. Her stomach twisted. Julian noticed. "What's with the face?" he asked one night as she scrolled through Ethan's public profiles. Nothing, she said too quickly. "Don't lie, Sab. You've been weird all week." "I'm just adjusting," she murmured, setting her phone down. "To what?" He tilted his head, annoyed. "To everything." He scoffed. "This is what you wanted, remember. Escape, excitement. No more boring dinners with spreadsheets and TED Talks." She bristled. Ethan wasn't boring. Julian laughed. Come on. He was a walking beige cardigan. That stung more than she expected. Julian leaned back, smug. "Look, you chose better. You're not a suburban wife in training anymore. Don't ruin it by romanticizing a man who couldn't even fight for you." Sabrina didn't respond, because deep down she knew that wasn't true. Ethan didn't fight because he knew he didn't have to. He didn't need to convince her of his worth, he knew it. She was the one who'd gambled everything and bet on the wrong man. She started having dreams. Ethan standing on the rooftop of their old building, whined in his hair, hands in his pockets. He never said a word, just stared at her like someone watching a stranger from a past life. She woke up sweating, her chest hollow. She tried calling him again, this time from a different number. He declined without hesitation. The honeymoon with Julian was over. Not because of one grand betrayal, but because of dozens of small disrespects that made her feel less and less like herself. And with every quiet day that passed, Ethan became more distant, more untouchable, like the version of him she'd never deserved to begin with. The first apology didn't come in words, it came in fragments. A forwarded article about design sustainability, one Ethan had co-authored. Then a memory from her phone, a video of them laughing during their honeymoon in Santorini. No text. Just silence and nostalgia. Ethan didn't reply. It had been 2 full months since he walked out, and his absence had transformed into something permanent, something sacred. Sabrina, once so sure of herself, now looked back with a gnawing ache that twisted deeper by the day. Julian, meanwhile, had stopped pretending. He grew colder, harsher. He criticized everything, her clothes, her new haircut, even her laugh. "You're trying too hard," he muttered one night. "That insecurity isn't cute." The words landed like a slap. When she brought up how emotionally distant he'd become, he smirked. "Don't confuse emotional absence with boundaries, Sab. This isn't a Hallmark movie." She didn't argue. She just went quiet because somewhere deep inside she realized this wasn't what she'd signed up for. This wasn't better. So she watched Ethan instead from afar. His new firm posted clips of his TEDx talk in Singapore. He stood in front of a full auditorium, composed, magnetic. He wasn't just doing well, he was thriving. And the internet noticed. Comments like effortlessly brilliant and visionary in his space flooded the video. His name was showing up in publications she'd never read before. And yet he hadn't said a word to her. She sent another message. This one was long, rambling, apologetic. She admitted to being lost to confusing stability with boredom. She said she missed how he made her feel safe, heard, real. Ethan read the message and archived it, because that version of him, the one who needed her validation, didn't exist anymore. She kept trying, a handwritten letter, a voicemail at 2:37 a.m. Her voice low and hoarse. "I don't even know if you'll ever listen to this, but I think I made a mistake." He played it once, not to feel anything, but to confirm that he didn't. It was Julian who noticed first. "You've been weird again," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Still hung up on your ex?" She didn't deny it. She just walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine. "I thought this was what you wanted," Julian said. "You left the spreadsheet guy for me. You wanted fire, and now you have it." "No," she said quietly. "I wanted to feel something." "And do you?" he asked with a mocking smile. She didn't answer. Because the truth was, she felt everything, and none of it good. The cracks had deepened. Julian was no longer charming, only condescending. The sex was mechanical, the conversations transactional, and her life, once built on soft routines and deep trust, now felt like an echo chamber of regret. She started showing up at places where she thought Ethan might be industry panels networking events. Once she saw him from across a room. He was laughing with Ariel Lynn, his colleague, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm confidence Sabrina couldn't compete with. He didn't see her. Or maybe he did, and simply chose not to react. That night she went home and cried not for what she'd lost, but for who she'd become to lose it. The silence Ethan had chosen wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was a message clear as glass: you can't rebuild a bridge you willingly burned. The thing about guilt is it doesn't always show up when you hurt someone. Sometimes it comes later, when the person you hurt stops waiting. Sabrina had convinced herself Ethan's silence was temporary. A phase. A storm cloud that would pass with time, maybe even melt into forgiveness. She believed he was punishing her, not leaving her. But he wasn't punishing. He was healing. And that healing had taken him far away from the version of himself who needed closure from her. Ethan had started something new in Singapore, not just professionally, but personally. He'd begun building a life that didn't revolve around loss. His days were packed with creative work collaboration and slow mornings that no longer felt hollow. He took walks through the botanic gardens. He swam in silence. He read essays by people who had crawled through emotional warfare and still came out gentle. He wasn't angry anymore. But Sabrina's reach began to claw again. One morning, he opened an email with the subject line, "I wish you could hear me." It was a 4-paragraph stream of longing, wrapped in self-pity, marked by phrases like, "I didn't know what I had, and I still wear the necklace you bought me." He deleted it. Not because he was cold, but because he no longer needed to carry the emotional weight of someone who let go first. Meanwhile, back in New York, Sabrina's facade was cracking. Julian had grown dismissive, even cruel. One night after an argument, he said, "You should have stayed with your little architect. At least he adored you, pathetic as it was." That sentence lingered in the silence like smoke. She didn't cry. Not then. She just left the room and sat on the bathroom floor, phone in hand, staring at Ethan's last message from before their wedding, a saved thread of "Let's build a life worth remembering." Now all she had were fragments. She reached out to Tate under the guise of checking in. They met for coffee. She asked casually how Ethan was doing. Tate looked at her unimpressed. "He's flourishing." Her eyes flickered. "Flourishing how work's booming. Global acclaim. He's healthier, happier, whole." She tried to smile. "I'm happy for him." "No, you're not," Tate said flatly. "You just didn't think he'd actually move on." She didn't respond. What could she say? That she thought he'd wait forever back in Singapore? Ethan got a message from Ariel. "You've been quieter than usual." "Everything okay?" he replied. "Actually, everything's finally okay." Ariel didn't pry. She didn't need to. There was something powerful about being around people who didn't know your past and didn't treat you like you were broken from it. Ethan had found space. Not just physical distance, but emotional clarity. And Sabrina, she had finally started to realize the hardest truth of all: Ethan wasn't hers anymore. Not even a little, because healing had made him unreachable to the person who shattered him. She thought he was waiting, but he'd already closed the door and locked it from the inside. Healing in private had its place, but Ethan knew it was time to reclaim his narrative out loud. He wasn't hiding anymore. When Ariel invited him to be the keynote speaker at an international architecture summit in Dubai, he hesitated only for a second. Then he said yes, not for prestige, but because he was ready to stand tall without apology. The stage was massive, the audience lined with global leaders in design, and the spotlight impossibly bright. As he stepped up, Ethan scanned the crowd not for Sabrina, but for his former self, the man who once crumbled under betrayal. He found nothing but calm. His voice was steady as he spoke about legacy sustainability and the emotional power of architecture. But near the end, he paused. "There's something we don't talk about enough," he said. "The spaces we design can't just be beautiful. They must be resilient, adaptive. They must survive abandonment, rebuild after collapse." He looked up. And that's not just true for buildings. The crowd erupted. Sabrina watched from her laptop in New York, the live stream glitching just enough to remind her she wasn't in the room, and never would be again. She had no way of knowing he'd seen her name on the registration list for a private donor reception she never attended. No way of knowing he'd quietly asked the organizers to make sure his name and hers never shared a space again. He was done letting her linger in the shadows of his success. Back in New York, Julian had turned cold to the point of cruelty. One morning after a silent breakfast, he muttered, "You're not even fun to come home to anymore." Sabrina blinked. "Was I ever?" He shrugged. "You were shiny, polished. Now you're just sorry." She laughed a bitter, broken sound. "Maybe that's what happens when you realize you burned down the wrong house." That night she packed a bag and left. No announcement, no drama, just keys on the counter and silence at her back. She didn't go to her parents, didn't return to any mutual friends. She checked into a boutique hotel in Soho and stared at the ceiling, wondering if pain ever felt embarrassed of itself. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to Manhattan with a quiet confidence. He visited the office of a renowned private school on the Upper East Side, one he and Sabrina had once talked about for their someday children. Not because he had a child, but because he wanted to sponsor a scholarship, a future built from something real. "You'll remain anonymous?" the admissions director asked. He nodded. "Let the results speak, not the name." The next day, he met with a real estate agent to purchase a brownstone he'd once considered too much house for two people. Now it was just enough for one man who refused to shrink his dreams for anyone else again. At night, he sat on the rooftop with a glass of wine and thought not about Sabrina, but about legacy. Growth. The long path to peace. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't rebuilding from scratch. He was building forward. There's a quiet type of humiliation that comes not from exposure, but from being ignored. Sabrina had always imagined consequences in the form of confrontation tears, maybe a last-ditch plea under the rain. What she hadn't imagined was indifference. When she left Julian, she expected Ethan would hear about it. That news would travel through the social grapevine, reach his inbox, and spark something: curiosity, empathy, anything. But it didn't. Ethan didn't reach out, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge her public unraveling. And that silence burned deeper than any insult Julian ever hurled. She tried attending a fundraiser Ethan's firm was sponsoring, dressed with precision, curated to remind him of who she used to be. but his assistant politely informed her at the entrance, "The guest list is firm tonight, thank you for understanding." It wasn't just the rejection, it was the unmistakable message, "You are no longer a part of his orbit." Back in her hotel room, she scrolled through headlines, "The vision behind tomorrow's skylines, Ethan Vaughn, named among top 50 most influential designers under 40. His photo-crisp suit, soft smirk, eyes unbothered, was everywhere. She turned off the screen, crawled into the hotel bed, and wept into the overpriced linens. Meanwhile, Ethan was elsewhere, laughing with Ariel and their design team at a post-launch celebration in Tribeca. They'd just landed a major urban renewal contract, one that would reshape public housing in Harlem without displacing its communities. It wasn't just about buildings, it was about rebuilding dignity. That mattered more to him now than legacy ever had. When Tate arrived, late champagne in hand, he leaned in and whispered, "She tried to crash your event last week." Ethan didn't miss a beat. "Was she let in?" "Nope. Security had your instructions." Ethan nodded. "Good. She's spiraling. Let her." Tate gave a slow exhale. "You're colder than I expected." "No," Ethan said, sipping his drink. "I'm just finally warm enough without her." That night, Sabrina opened her inbox to find a single message from Ethan's lawyer, an official notice relinquishing any remaining joint assets, even though legally he didn't need to. It read, "There's nothing left I want. Consider this closure." The document was neat, clinical, final. Sabrina stared at it for a long time, wondering if she could ever match that kind of peace. She spent the next week in silence, skipping calls from her sister, ignoring texts from Julian, now suddenly curious again, and watching the weather shift outside the hotel window, like time itself was mocking her. She ordered takeout she didn't eat, started emails she never sent, replayed old voicemails Ethan had left her when they were still building a life, his voice full of love, laughter, plans, and then deleted them. Because hearing him from the past only made the present more unbearable. For Ethan, though, the silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was sanctuary. He walked into his newly purchased brownstone each evening with pride. No ghosts in the walls, no echoes in the rooms, just space to breathe. And while Sabrina drifted in a fog of consequence, Ethan moved with intention. Because when you stop chasing the ones who let go of you, you finally get to meet the person they almost destroyed, but didn't. Ethan hadn't planned to cross paths with Sabrina again until fate placed them on opposite ends of the same boarding gate at JFK. He was flying to Tokyo for a design summit. She was returning from a failed pitch in Austin, her portfolio rejected by a firm that had once courted her. Her hair was tied in a messy knot blazer, wrinkled from the red eye. No makeup, no armor. She looked exhausted. He looked untouchable. She saw him first calmly seated in the Delta One lounge navy sweater, sharp against the walnut table laptop open to blueprints she couldn't begin to interpret. Ariel sat beside him, laughing softly. Sabrina froze. Ethan hadn't changed. He had only sharpened. He noticed her after a beat. Their eyes locked. She rose on instinct, walked toward him slowly, unsure if her legs were carrying hope or shame. "Ethan," she breathed. He closed his laptop. "Sabrina." There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to remind her this wasn't her story anymore. "I didn't expect to see you here," she offered. "Likewise." She glanced at Ariel, who looked politely amused. "You look, well." "I am. Can we talk?" Ethan checked his watch, then gestured to a quieter corner. Ariel nodded. "I'll wait." They walked a few paces away, but not too far. Ethan had no intention of creating privacy where it wasn't earned. I left Julian, she said quickly. Months ago. It wasn't what I thought. I know. You know, he nodded. Tate mentioned it. She studied him. And that's it, no questions, no curiosity. Ethan's face was calm, not cold measured. You made your choice, he said. And I made mine. We're not obligated to orbit each other anymore. But I was wrong, she blurted. That doesn't mean I was right for you, he replied. Sometimes people make bad choices. It doesn't mean we hit rewind. She blinked, startled by his poise. I miss what we had. No, he said gently. You miss who I was to you. Who I was when I loved you. That man doesn't exist anymore. Tears rimmed her eyes. You won't even consider I did, he cut in. A long time ago. I considered every angle, every memory, every version of what we could have been. He stepped back. But the truth is, I've built something better. Without resentment. Without replaying your mistakes. Her breath caught. Ethan smiled faintly. Closure isn't a conversation, Sabrina. It's a decision. She wiped her cheek. I was hoping maybe we could try again. A gate agent announced boarding. His flight, right on cue. Ethan looked her square in the eye. I'm not angry anymore, he said. But I also don't owe you my future. She nodded slowly. As he turned to walk away, she called out softly. Do you ever think about what we almost had? He paused. Just enough to be kind. Then glanced over his shoulder. No. I think about how lucky I was not to have it. And with that, he walked onto the plane, leaving her standing in a terminal full of strangers who couldn't see the wreckage behind her eyes. There was no victory in the airport goodbye, just clarity. Ethan didn't look back as the jet took off the skyline fading beneath him. He didn't replay the scene, didn't reanalyze her face or her voice or the last sentence she whispered as he walked away. There was nothing left to mine. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't carrying any of her weight. Tokyo welcomed him with quiet skies and purposeful energy. The summit was a success, panels, lectures, even a design award that he accepted with unexpected humility. But the highlight wasn't on stage. It was in the in-between moments. The stillness. He wandered the streets of Shibuya with a journal in hand, sketched facades, noted curves in architecture and character alike. One evening after a gallery exhibit, Ariel caught him smiling to himself. What's that look? She asked. I just realized he said I'm not angry anymore. That's not new, is it? No, he nodded. But now I'm not even waiting to prove it. She grinned. Growth tastes better than revenge. Back in New York, Sabrina moved into a small apartment in Brooklyn Heights. It was tidy, minimalist, everything she once mocked in Ethan's style. She tried to write again freelance design blogs and case studies. But the inspiration came in sputters. Her work had lost its voice. She found herself checking his social media, a photo of him and Ariel presenting together at a design panel. The comments were kind. Too kind. Power duo, one wrote. They're redefining what modern design partnerships look like. She didn't even feel jealousy, just distance. And that somehow hurt more. She called Tate, left a voicemail. I'm not asking for updates. I just wanted to say I'm happy he's doing well. Truly. Tate didn't respond. A quiet message in itself. Ethan returned home a week later. The brownstone was warm, sun-drenched. He poured a coffee, sat by the window, and didn't think of her. Not once. Instead, he thought about his next mentorship series, an initiative to help young minority architects gain footing in luxury design. He called it New Foundations. Symbolic. Intentional. That weekend at a black tie gala in the Met, he and Ariel stood side by side as their firm was honored for their global social impact work. Ethan spoke last. "When we build," he said to the crowd, "we don't just shape skylines, we shape the way people carry their stories. And if we're lucky, we create spaces that hold healing, not hurt." The audience rose to their feet. Sabrina watched from home. No invitation, just live stream. Her reflection in the laptop screen looked older. Not tired, just aware. She whispered to no one in particular. He was never coming back. That night, Ethan walked home alone through Central Park. No phone in hand, no playlist, just the hush of spring trees brushing above him. And somewhere along the path, without warning or fanfare, he knew there was no doorway for her anymore. Not even a crack. Just a solid, beautiful wall he had built not out of spite, but out of self-respect. It began as an idea on a napkin during a layover in Zurich, a mentorship hub for underrepresented designers. Ethan didn't intend for it to become a legacy project. But once it gained traction, it quickly evolved into something much larger. New foundations launched 3 months later inside a renovated industrial building in Lower Manhattan. Ethan paid for it himself. No sponsors, no board, no diluted mission. He wanted control. Not for ego, but for integrity. The press coverage was immediate. Not just architectural journals, but mainstream outlets, lifestyle magazines. Architect of the Future One headline called him, "From Betrayal to Blueprint." He hated that one. Not because it wasn't true, but because it made pain his origin story. That wasn't the point anymore. Inside the hub, Ethan welcomed the first cohort, 10 designers all in their 20s, each with a different story, a different hunger. He didn't just fund their dreams, he sat with them, reviewed their sketches, asked about their mothers, laughed with them when they bombed presentations, and cried with them when their first offers came in. They weren't just mentees. They were proof that something beautiful could grow where everything once collapsed. Meanwhile, Sabrina's world had narrowed. Her freelance gigs dried up. A former client ghosted after discovering her connection to Ethan, news that had somehow leaked through the wrong channels. She sent out resumes. Most went unanswered. One firm requested an interview, then canceled abruptly with a sterile one-liner. "We're pursuing a different aesthetic direction." Translation. She'd become radioactive. She Googled Ethan's foundation late one night, scrolling through photos of the ribbon cutting. There he was, surrounded by young talent, sunlight pouring through a wall of windows like some poetic metaphor. She thought of reaching out, maybe an apology letter for real this time. No excuses. No bait. Just truth. But for the first time, she didn't. Not because she had healed, because she knew he had. And anything she said now would only stain the silence he'd earned. One afternoon, Ethan received a letter not from Sabrina, but from her mother. A brief note on thick stationery. "You were always too good for her. I hope you're living the life she couldn't respect." He folded it once. Never replied. Didn't need to. His mother called that same evening voice, thick with pride. "Your father would have loved this project," she said. Ethan smiled. "I think he's watching." Later, as dusk rolled across the city, he stepped onto the rooftop of the mentorship center looking out over the skyline. The wind was sharp, but not cruel. Ariel joined him with 2 mugs of tea. "They adore you, you know," she said. "I'm not doing it for that." "I know," she replied. That's why it works. He sipped slowly. The skyline shimmered. No ghosts, no shadows, just the steady beat of purpose. And for the first time in his adult life, Ethan wasn't just recovering from something. He was building toward something no one could ever take away. Spring in Manhattan arrived without announcement, just warmer wind, fuller sidewalks, and Ethan's inbox flooded with invitations. Panels, galas, interviews. He accepted few. The only one that mattered was the scholarship luncheon for new foundations. It was small, intimate. 10 guests. One of them was Cameron, a 23-year-old from Detroit, who'd just landed a junior architect role at a legacy firm in D.C. "You changed my life," Cameron said, eyes damp. "Before this program, I was sleeping in my car outside job fairs." Ethan didn't flinch. "You changed it. I just opened the door." But that's when he realized something inside him had shifted. He no longer needed to prove he was whole. He simply was. That same afternoon, Sabrina stood alone on the Brooklyn Heights promenade looking out over the East River. In her coat pocket was a letter. Handwritten. Honest. Apologetic. Not a plea, not a trap. Just closure. She'd rewritten it 6 times. She never mailed it. Because deep down, she knew Ethan didn't need her words anymore. And that maybe healing wasn't always about asking for forgiveness, but about learning when to leave people in peace. She turned and walked away. Across the river, Ethan strolled through Central Park with Ariel. They spoke about launching new foundations west in San Francisco. Same mission. Bigger reach. "You ever think you'll go back?" Ariel asked. "To what? To that part of your life? The house, the marriage, the memories." Ethan considered it. "No," he said. "Some places aren't meant to be revisited. They're meant to remind you what survival looked like." Later that week, Ethan received a legal document in the mail, a formal release from a joint business account he and Sabrina had opened years ago and forgotten. She had finally closed it. Attached was a sticky note in her handwriting. "Thank you for letting me go without war." No signature. No request. He folded the note, slid it into a drawer. Not to keep her alive, but to remember the lesson. That week, the Mentorship Center's second cohort began. Ethan stood at the front, arms crossed, watching the new faces settle into the space he'd designed for them. Someone asked if he ever missed what came before. He smiled. "No," he said. "What came before was the blueprint. But this is the build." At home that night, he watered the plants along the brownstone windowsill, something he once forgot to do for weeks. Now he found it calming. A kind of ritual. A quiet reminder that small things deserved attention too. Before bed, he glanced around the room. Framed sketches. A photo of his father. A folded scarf Ariel had left on the chair. Peace didn't arrive as fireworks. It arrived as nothing left to fix. Sabrina, on her side of the city, began sketching again, not for clients, but for herself. Empty spaces. Quiet corners. Rooms that felt like apologies and forgiveness coexisting. She wasn't redeemed, but she was beginning to understand herself. And that was something. Just not something Ethan needed to see. There was a time Ethan believed legacy had to be inherited. That power came from lineage, that influence passed through bloodlines and boardrooms. But standing in the atrium of the newly completed Vaughan Design Institute, watching families walk through the entrance he'd once sketched on a napkin, Ethan finally saw it differently. Legacy wasn't something you inherited. It was something you chose to earn, brick by brick, decision by decision. The institute had taken 18 months to finish. A hybrid between a design school and think tank, it offered full scholarships to students who had the skill, but not the access. It was part education, part revolution. And his name was on it not for vanity, but for responsibility. The opening gala was invitation only. Ethan wore a tailored gray tux minimalist lapel pin and his late father's watch. Ariel was beside him in a dark satin dress, elegant but effortless. "Are you nervous?" she asked as the first donors arrived. "No," he said, surprising himself. "I think I'm ready." The mayor gave a speech. So did a former professor. And finally it was Ethan's turn. He took the stage, no notes, no teleprompter. "My mother once told me the best buildings aren't made of steel," he began. "They're made of purpose, of pain, of persistence." The room went still. "I built this place for the kid I used to be, the one who thought talent was enough, the one who had to learn the hard way that access, not ability, decides too much in this world. I built this so that going forward maybe it won't." Applause swelled like a wave. Sabrina watched from home again. A live stream. This time no note in her hand, no message in draft. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just watched. And for the first time she understood she hadn't just lost a man. She'd lost the future he was always going to build with or without her. Across the city, Ethan stood on the rooftop of the institute hours after the gala ended. He looked out at the skyline. The same skyline he once dreamed of being part of. Now he had shaped it. Tate joined him, 2 glasses of bourbon in hand. "You did it," Tate said. "No," Ethan replied. "We did." You ever wonder if she watches Ethan smirked? I hope she does. Not out of bitterness, just so she knows. I was never the mistake. Tate raised his glass. "To building new." Ethan clinked his, and leaving rubble behind. They drank in silence. That night, Ethan didn't dream of the past. No fragments, no rewind loops, just a clean mental canvas ready for the next design. And that was the moment he knew closure wasn't just distance from pain. It was presence in peace. Ethan didn't notice the rain until after the photo op. The crowd had thinned outside the institute, as guests filtered into cars and carriages, umbrellas blooming like dark petals along the Manhattan curb. A man from the New York Times had just finished his second interview with Ethan, calling him the architect of the decade. He stood under the awning alone, jacket draped over one arm, watching the droplets ripple across the marble steps he once couldn't afford to walk on. Behind him, the building bore his name. Vaughn. Once he thought it would be nothing more than a footnote beside his father's obituary. Now it was carved into the future. Inside, Ariel coordinated logistics for the press. Tate gave one of the mentees a firm handshake and handed her a business card, an internship offer most likely. Everyone was moving. Forward. Everyone except Sabrina. She had applied for a mid-level position at a boutique agency that specialized in hospitality interiors. She had passed the phone interview. Then the second. Then nothing. Radio silence. Her former mentor Laura called her 3 weeks later. "They Googled you," Laura said gently. "It wasn't the affair. It was what you did with it." Sabrina said nothing. "You disappeared into scandal instead of rebuilding." It was a quiet gut punch. She hung up, numb. That same day, she opened her inbox to a newsletter she hadn't unsubscribed from Designing Forward. Ethan's new institute was spotlighted again. A young student featured in the article said, "He doesn't just teach us to design, he teaches us to forgive ourselves." Sabrina closed her laptop. Forgiveness was never the issue. It was her entitlement to it. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in a classroom filled with second-year mentees. He asked each of them to design a space that reflected what they feared most. "Fear makes us build defensively," he said. "But truth, that's where the real structures come from." One student drew a windowless room, another a stairway that never ended. Ethan didn't judge. He just nodded. After class, he stepped outside and called his mother. "You'd have loved it," he said. "You were right. We build more than homes. You always had it in you," she replied. She just couldn't see it. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't need to. He returned home to find a package at his door. Inside a book on Japanese architectural minimalism. No note, but the handwriting on the label was familiar. He didn't open the book. He placed it gently into the donation pile. Some stories, even when wrapped neatly, didn't need to be reopened. That night, Ariel joined him for dinner. Quiet laughter, 2 glasses of wine, and a conversation about legacy not loss. No ghosts were named. No pasts were rehashed. It was a summit built alone. And she was simply someone who climbed with him, not carried him, not saved him. He didn't need saving. He needed space to grow where no one had watered him before. And now he was blooming. Quietly. Boldly. Without her. It wasn't a ceremony or an award that marked the end. It was a Tuesday morning. No headlines. No applause. Just a soft breeze drifting through the open windows of Ethan's brownstone sunlight spilling onto the hardwood floors. A kettle whistled in the background while he sat barefoot on the couch, sketching quietly in a notepad he hadn't touched in weeks. The drawing wasn't for a client. It wasn't a commission. Just a simple sketch of an open courtyard, sunlit quiet, surrounded by walls that didn't cage but protected. It looked nothing like his old work. It looked like him. Outside New York hummed its usual tempo. But inside Ethan's space-time moved differently. Deliberately. He brewed tea instead of coffee now. Spoke slower. Laughed more often. And when his phone buzzed with a call from an international agency begging him to take a last-minute keynote slot in Berlin, he declined without guilt. Not every door needed to be opened. Later that afternoon, he visited the Vaughan Institute. There was a new art installation in the lobby designed entirely by students. He let them present without interruption, took notes, asked questions. When one student nervously explained the theme Quiet Triumphs, Ethan smiled. "Perfect title," he said. "They're the ones that last." Across the city, Sabrina received an offer from a modest design blog to write a weekly column. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but honest. She accepted. She didn't mention Ethan in the bio, not because she was ashamed, but because she'd stopped seeing him as her shadow. In her own quiet way, she had finally released the rope. That night, Ethan walked alone through Central Park, a route he once took during the worst days of his life. The trees hadn't changed, the skyline hadn't shifted, but he had. He paused at a bench near the lake, one he used to sit on, while wrestling with betrayal, self-doubt, and the wreckage of a future that had collapsed. Now he sat without weight. The past hadn't vanished. It had simply run out of power. Back home, he tucked the old sketch into a folder labeled Personal Concepts, not meant for clients, not for galleries, just for him. His voice unfiltered, no longer altered to fit someone else's vision. He didn't hear from Sabrina again. She became a distant character in a chapter already closed. Not an enemy. Not a muse. Just gone. Peace didn't crash in like thunder. It arrived like breath, slow, intentional, full of life. And Ethan no longer sought applause. He had built something unshakable, not just a firm or an institute or even a name, but a self. A man who'd been broken, but never undone, who rose not through revenge, but by quietly refusing to stay small. He had become his own home. And in that home there were no ghosts, only light. Sometimes the most profound victories are the ones no one claps for. They're not headlines or grand finales. They're found in quiet mornings, steady breath, and the absence of pain where it once lived. True healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live beside it without flinching. When betrayal comes, it doesn't just fracture trust. It fractures identity. But what rises from the rubble isn't a replica of the person before. It's someone new. Someone who no longer begs for love where respect was lost, who doesn't fight to be understood by those who never listened. Growth isn't loud. It's not always beautiful, but it is honest. And eventually life stops revolving around what was done to you and starts blossoming from what you chose to do next. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how it resonated with you. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that speaks to the heart. Until next time, take care and keep choosing peace, no matter how loud the world gets.